funny enough, I think I've talked about this on another podcast, but to me, the most organic stage of BLM was like 2013 to like 2017, let's say. And this was actually during the time it was really difficult to say that you were a part of the BLM. But I think that's why it was more on a mission of objectives of, investing into the community, divesting in things that aren't helping the community, anti-police violence, like just objectively fundamental changes that should happen that I think all Americans would be like, yeah, we'll get on this. Then as I think when it got popularized and trendy, people started being a part of the helm of BLM and direction. And it's like maybe a business here or an organization here would pour into BLM fund-wise. And then they might be like, oh, can you guys also talk about this? Or can you guys like have these other initiatives? And then muddying the waters of what BLM was doing. And then I saw the cultural conversation different. And this is when, in 2018, is when I really was like, I don't know if I recognize what's going on here or if any of this is actually going to help the Black community. So certain things that was going on that were very popular narratives was white silence is violence, and that in conversations when we're talking about race or social issues, white people need to be silent. Like, people call her need to talk, you need to not talk, nothing, do the work, stuff like that. And I started thinking like logically making sense of these. I'm like, does this make sense? Because so at a protest, we want people, their silence is violence. So we want them just to scream out a name or say Black Lives Matter, or say their names. But then when we go in these rooms to talk about racism and talk about what's happening nationally or locally, we don't want them to talk, and if they do ask a question or if they do get emotional, or if they do want to be a part of the discussion, they're centering themselves. It's white fragility. It's white tears. It's like all this stuff. And I started thinking like, but low key, like they should be a part of the conversation, because the racism is not just something that only involves minorities. It involves everybody. So they need to be talking with us for us to understand what's going on here and how to make a change. And if we want equality and if we want to have this reconciliation, we can't do that with a whole group of people being silent and never being able to express how they feel. Or like, you have to at least let people talk and you can challenge what they're saying. But to say you can't speak because of your color is exactly what people said to us. And I was just thinking like, okay, I think this is backfiring on the mission. I don't think this is helping. And also I was seeing it's actually creating an escapism for people to do this performative allyship. Like, it's just go to the events and be there for us. And people will be like, all right. And they take their Instagram picture and they post it, deuces, and that's it. But, and then I would get upset by that. But then again, it's almost like people either, even if it was just for their ego or if they're really earnest and like, I want to make change, people want to showcase, like, I'm not trying to be a part of the problem. So if they're like, I can't have this conversation and tell and express myself, then I got to show it somehow. So people then are going to post themselves somewhere because they want to see, like, see, I'm good too. Like, I'm doing, I don't want to, So I just saw how all of this just wasn't making sense. And then I went to NYU and then I started on an academic level, I guess you could say, looking at the race conversation happening and examining that, and then making essays and articles and stuff in grad school and out of grad school. But the most authentic stage was when there was something to lose if you were doing BLM. It was like people really were doing that for a real cause. And then when it got trendy, it was like those people are still there. And now a lot of other people are like, oh, it's cool to be in BLM? All right, cool. Bet. Here I am. Jeez. And these people are there for maybe that day. But it was like this flood of people just coming in and kind of co-opting the whole thing. And now I'm seeing Netflix with BLM on their thing. And I'm seeing all this stuff. And I'm like, what is, like, this is so bizarre. And then I'm seeing like actual, like dead people on people's shirts. Like, I don't know who was the first one, but like, Tamar Rice or or, Sandra, or Trayvon Martin. Like, these people being on people's shirts that were being bought. And it was just weird. I'm like, why is Black Death being like on merchandise? Like, and then you're saying capitalism is the problem. Yeah, sensationalized, and you're saying capitalism is a problem, but then you're selling shirts of Black Death. I mean, that's really what you're doing. And then the money isn't going back to the families. I mean, it's going to you. It's so weird. And so I started just questioning BLM. Big question mark. Then in 2020, my mind shifted when I saw that the protests weren't just happening for a week, because usually that's how long protests were happening. I'm like, oh, wow, it's like 2 weeks, 3, a month, 2. Oh, wow, it's in like Japan, it's in Germany. Like, it was jumping abroad. And I was like, this actually might be a change here. Like, this is crazy. But then certain things were happening where I'm like, maybe not. I remember 2020 in Portland or Washington, D.C., one of the two, there was a BLM that actually mostly made up of white allies. So how allies vary like this. And they were wearing like Black Lives Matter shirts, and they were marching downtown. And this is, during the pandemic. So people were eating outside, and they were destroying this stuff. They're like, put your hands up and say Black Lives Matter now, or you're a white supremacist. And if people wouldn't do it, they'd be in their faces chanting Black Lives Matter and telling them to put their hands up. And I'm thinking, there's two things there. I don't want anyone to be forced to like me. I don't care. Like, I don't want anyone to be forced to say I matter. I don't want that to be mandated, because that's not real. It's fake. And two, you aren't allies doing this, because in the news, when they say a Black Lives Matter group destroyed a whole restaurant's, location, people are automatically going to think it was Black people. And most of these people I saw were white. So I was pissed, to say the least, but I was thinking, okay, Black Lives Matter, the national BLM will say something for sure.
Yeah.
It goes by, say nothing. And I'm like, why aren't you guys denouncing this?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. And I'll start by saying, as an outsider to the actual BLM organization, I wasn't in the organization, didn't go to rallies. I support the flourishing and the betterment of Black people's lives and, people's lives in general. But I was not part of the BLM movement, but I would see chatter online. I'd see chatter on Twitter, YouTube, just, scrolling, shit like that. And, it's impossible to ignore, and I don't think it should be ignored. And from a human being perspective, it's good to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there and how to react and respond to people. And as a content creator, it's also good to be able to have conversations and understand where other people are coming from. And I remember feeling back around 2015, 2016 timeline, right when I started podcasting and sort of paying attention to the movement, it seemed like things were much more consolidated into, we are against anti-Black violence of police and anti-Black violence in general. And a lot of the messaging I was seeing was around that sentiment. How are we going to prevent Black people from getting killed by police? And then as time went on, it seemed like the lines got blurred to where I was confused exactly what the primary cause or primary causes of BLM was. Socially, financially, strategically. It was, hearing things like the money from the national chapters is not being given to local chapters, seeing different things about strategies and things that have nothing to do with anti-Black police violence, like the silence equals violence, things like that. And then along those lines, once it became more popular, which is also when I saw the lines start to get more blurred as to what the true mission was, these corporations started coming in. And my first thought was, okay, if Wall Street, if Nike, like all these big corporations that have a shit ton of money and their own interests at hand, if they're all going full in on Black Lives Matter, what is the ulterior motive here? And I'm not smart enough. I don't have the resources to actually dig to the bottom of that. But I was thinking, like, what sort of protection are they after? Why are they all of a sudden choosing to get in now? Why not back in 2013? Why not before the movement started? Why not start a movement of their own? What is behind all this money being pumped into Black Lives Matter? And yes, there are a lot of people that want to do good things with that money, but there are also, you can't deny the corporate interests in the mix of people who want to throw up that flag and signal that I am in support of this, which does two things. It gets your attention, but it also distracts you from something else. So my head automatically went to, like, what do these corporations want to distract from? What's like this hand waving kind of, what do you call it? Like, just, I can't think of the word, but kind of like waving over here to distract from what's going on in another spot, because you're not really able to pay attention to two things at once. And then with all the social media stuff, when it started to become more popular, not just at the corporate level, but at the private level, which is the person-to-person individual level, which is probably what drove the corporations to start pumping millions and billions of dollars into BLM. On an individual level, it's never been easier to craft the perspective of how you want others to view you, where you can post something, you can post yourself at a rally, or you can post a quote, you can post, like, and I do this with podcasting.
Black box.
Yeah, black box. Like, I struggle with this in podcasting because I want to appear professional and legit as a podcaster with the posts, with the images that I put out for each episode and as a whole. And sometimes I get caught up in it too much, where I'm like, is my goal to seem like a great podcaster, or is my goal to make good podcasts? Which one is more important? And if I worry too much about the image of the podcast, the actual podcast suffers, but the image of the podcast is certainly important as well. Yeah. So it's just all of those things, the corporatization of BLM, the individual manipulation with social media and algorithms around BLM, and also just the lines getting blurred. It was very difficult to get a feel for what the organization was. Like, if you were to give a 1 or 2 sentence elevator pitch on this is who we are and what we do, that started for me to get really hard to do when I would ask myself, like, what is this? Like, what is this movement? I know what it started as. I know what I support. Does what I support align with what this movement is now?